Well, I'm going to get started. We have a nice group this morning. I'm so thankful for everyone that's able to join us this morning. And I would like to give a very warm welcome to Mr. Michael McDavid. He's our speaker. Mr. McDavid grew up in Greenville, South Carolina, and has lived in Atlanta for the past 50 years. He's been interested in history since the second grade. Over the years, his primary focus settled on European history, although if it happened in the past, it was of potential interest. Michael majored in history as an undergrad at Furman University, then received a master's degrees in European history and library science from Emory University. He was a library manager at Equifax Inc. and Georgia State University. During this time, to satisfy his historical itch, Michael taught history at Georgia Perimeter College as an adjunct faculty member. Now, after retiring from the Boston Consulting Group, he is privileged to offer courses at Ollie on topics such as 19th century Europe and his favorite subspecialty, the Royal Monarchy, past and present. He is also the curriculum committee chair for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Emory University in Atlanta. He's a very popular and prolific speaker and has taught numerous courses for Ollie at Emory. We are very fortunate that we're able to have him via Zoom today, and I want to turn it over to him. I want to remind you to mute yourselves. Mr. McDavid shared with me that if you have questions after the first 2 or 3 slides, please, you're welcome to ask questions during the presentation, or if you'd rather put it in the chat box, I can ask the question, but please just feel free to have this an ongoing conversation as we're going along. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. McDavid. And again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I certainly welcome all of you to this presentation. Very much appreciative of the fact that we have enough people here who are interested in such an esoteric subject as this. As I was thinking about it, in doing a little preparation, I thought this is what I would kind of call a hardcore topic. It's not going to make you a better person. It's not going to make you the grandchildren like you any better, or it's just one of those topics that if you have an interest in it, you may want to know more. And what I will do is I'm going to put up a PowerPoint in just a second, is as Elizabeth just said, if everyone will mute yourselves, I will stop after every second or third slide. And if you have questions or comments, then, unmute yourself and feel free to make them, because this will try to make this more of a dialogue than a monologue or lecture. So that being said, let me see if we can get the screen shared here. That looks promising. Okay, all right. So can everyone see this first slide with the royal mob on the balcony at Buckingham Palace? Okay. Okay. I created this lecture a while ago for our Ollie class because I had a number of people who are in the program who are real Anglophiles and who are devoted watchers of shows like Downton Abbey and now Bridgerton, and other people, who like to read British novels, people like Jane Austen and so forth. And everybody said they've never understood, the whole system in terms of titles with the people, who have, either royal or aristocratic titles. So I thought, well, it would probably be fun to put together a little piece here. And so that's what we're going to have. So it's, again, just something basically, if you find it interesting to learn a little more about. I will say to you, I have, with this class, I created what I call a cheat sheet that will summarize everything. So don't feel any necessity, if you were thinking about it, of like taking notes, because I sent Elizabeth a copy of the cheat sheet, which she can forward to all of you after the lecture's over. So feel free just to sit back and listen and ask questions, and hopefully at the end you'll know a little bit more about British class system than you did when we started. Okay, so let's kick off here and go over a few definitions, such as royalty. Royalty refers to those people who belong to the family of a monarch. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a monarch who has the title of king. In European history, it could be someone who was an emperor, which is an even higher title, but it could be someone who's the monarch had a title of like duke or grand duke or what have you. So anyway, basic definition, if someone is a member of the family of a monarch, i.e. a ruler, then he or she would qualify likely as being royalty. Where I've learned that Americans tend to get confused often is mixing up what's the difference between royalty and aristocracy. Now, keep in mind too, we're just in this today talking about Britain, you know, the United Kingdom or the UK, as I'll probably refer to. We're not talking about royalty and nobility on the continent of Europe. So in the British system, the aristocracy or nobility, the two terms essentially mean the same thing. They're members of the hereditary social class ranking below that of royalty. And we're going to go into a little more detail about it, but at the top of the aristocracy are the people who are the peers or who have a peerage, which is a title of nobility granted by the monarch. And the British peerage is divided up into 5 descending ranks, which we're again going to probably talk about more than you might be interested in hearing. Takeaway term, royalty and aristocracy are not synonymous terms. Okay, so let's start then and look at the current British royal family. Found this nice photo of the, to your right here, of the Queen. The current monarch, as I'm sure you all know, of the United Kingdom is Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And this is one of those pictures that everybody loves to have. It shows the 4 generations in the family of those who are most likely to be monarchs down the road. So I'm sure you all recognize the Queen. You probably recognize her oldest son, Prince Charles, who has the title of Prince of Wales. Prince Charles's oldest son, Prince William, who now has the title of the Duke of Cambridge, and Prince William's oldest son, Prince George, whose official title would be Prince George of Cambridge. Since 1917, the dynastic name of the British royal family is the House of Windsor. Now that is relatively new. You know, it's a little more than 100 years old. Prior to that, since the early 18th century, it was the House of Hanover. Then that changed when King Edward VII succeeded Queen Victoria, and it became the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. And then in 1917, the decision was made to change it to Windsor, primarily because Britain and most of Europe were involved in World War I, and Britain was fighting Germany, and anything German was not very popular at the time. And so since the name of the royal family at that time, you know, was Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, you couldn't get much more German than that. As essentially, King George V, the monarch at the time, was really starting to get concerned about, is this family and this monarchy going to last? Because there was such anti-German feeling in the UK. So a number of things happened in 1917. They decided to change the name of the family to Windsor, which is, couldn't get a much more English name than that. And they made a number of members of the family who had German sounding titles, changed them as well. But we don't need to go into that any more than what I've just talked about. So who qualifies as being a member of the British royal family? According to the rules that were set up in 1917, the royal family consists of people who are the children, that is, male and female, and male line grandchildren of the monarch. That is, the children of the monarch's son. Those people are from birth automatically have the style prince or princess, and they are further referred to as His or Her Royal Highness. Now, an interesting thing about monarchy in Europe is, and this goes for ones on the continent as well, people who use the style Royal Highness do not use a family name. When Queen Elizabeth signs anything official, she just signs it Elizabeth. And Prince Charles, does the same thing. They don't use a family name. It's just tradition. There are many members of the current extended royal family, though, who are not a royal highness, who do need a family name. They need for legal purposes and what have you. So they use either the name Windsor as a family name, or those who are the descendants of the Queen here, they use the name Mountbatten Windsor as a tribute to Queen Elizabeth's late husband, Prince Philip. Another thing to know is that women who marry into the royal family are entitled to use the same styles and titles as their spouses. In other words, they're considered royal by marriage. Okay, I'll stop there for a minute and see if any of you have any questions, comments to make. Anybody? And please feel free to do so. Anybody? I'm already overwhelming you with information.
Quick question. Thank
Okay.
you. The peerage people are at the highest level of that aristocracy, and yet some of those are by genealogy, and some of the peerage people, if not all of them, have been granted that by the monarch. So, but they actually move ahead of all of the aristocracy. You said in one line of the slide that the peerage people are at the highest list of the aristocracy. And I would think maybe some of those titles would be, but not all of them would be, but all 5 of those subclasses are at the top of the line, correct?
When you're talking about the British aristocracy, people who are peers, and the last time I saw any numbers currently, I think there may be 1,000 or so peers from all the different ranks in it. And we're going to talk about that more. But yeah, I mean, they're the tip end of the tip of the pyramid, right? Most of the peerages until last, say, 50 years or so, that were granted were hereditary. So as long as a family could, keep producing sons, you could keep the peerage going. Nowadays, since I think maybe the 70s or so, it's evolved that hereditary peerages, except members of the royal family, are no longer granted. All the peerages that are granted now by the Queen are what are called life peerages. That is, and it's essentially for politicians, for the most part. And they're not hereditary. It's just, a one-shot deal. So the hereditary peerage is pretty much set now in terms of how many of them they're going to be. But we'll talk more about that when we get to that section of the lecture. Anybody else?
You don't need to answer this probably fully now because you're probably going to get at this, but like in the current current events where Harry and Andrew have been, something has been done by their titling. The whole hereditary thing is not priority, or how? You'll probably address this.
Yeah, I mean, to give you a quick answer to your question, I would use the term, the Brits wouldn't. Harry and Andrew have been demoted. That being said, they are still princes. I mean, that's just,
that's the given. Mm-hmm.
That's a given. And they still have their titles of Duke of York and Duke of Sussex, but they're no longer a royal highness. And that's where the demotion comes in. But I'll say a little bit more about that.
Thank you. I thought that's good clarity.
Sure. Anybody else? All right, then let's keep going here. All right. All right, styles and titles in the Queen's family. We'll just go through this fairly quickly. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, of course, that is her primary title as the sovereign, of the United Kingdom. Also has, a whole string of other titles that have come through history, basically. She's also the Duke of Lancaster, not the Duchess, the Duke. She has the title of Defender of the Faith as the head of the Church of England, which goes back to the Henry VIII and the Reformation. She's the head of the Knights of the Garter. I mean, she's got several dozen titles. Prince Charles, as her eldest son and as the heir, his primary title is the Prince of Wales. And again, that's a title with the British monarchy that goes back into the Middle Ages when it was first created for the heir to the throne. But he's also the Duke of Cornwall, the Duke of Rothesay, the Earl of Chester, Lord of the Isles and Scotland, and even more beside that. The Queen has 4 children, three sons and a daughter. Her daughter is Princess Anne, who was her second child. And she is, her official styling is Her Royal Highness, the Princess Anne. But along the way, she also acquired the title from her mother of the Princess Royal. So if you were looking at a British publication that was talking about Princess Anne, you'd probably see her referred to as the Princess Royal. And that's a title that came about, I think, in the 18th century or so, that was given to the oldest daughter of the monarch. Now, Princess Anne has been married twice. Her first husband was a soldier named Mark Phillips, and they got a divorce along the way after she had 2 children. And now she's married to an admiral in the Royal Navy. His name's Timothy Lawrence. So Princess Anne's 2 children, her son is Mr. Peter Phillips, and her daughter is Mrs. Zara Tyndall. She's married. Titles in the British system, along with most of them in the continent, do not descend from the mother. It's the whole system of monarchy and nobility and so forth, when they were created many centuries, if not millennia ago, were created by men for men. And women have traditionally not been, looked upon as equal as far as the system goes. So Princess Anne's children do not have any titles to inherit. Had their father had a title, which I think he was offered one by the Queen when he and Anne were married, and he turned it down, the son would have potentially inherited that. But because their father had no titles, they have no titles. So they're plain old Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, even though they're the Queen's grandchildren. Now, the Queen's two younger sons, as I imagine most of you are aware, the second son, Prince Andrew, is the Duke of York, and the youngest son, Prince Edward, is His Royal Highness, the Earl of Wessex. Now, Prince Andrew, until pretty recently, was His Royal Highness, but you may have seen, in some of the press because of his very foolishly getting involved with what was Epstein? I've forgotten. The American guy with all the sexual hijinks and what have you. Prince Andrew's reputation probably is shot for the rest of his life, even though he's not been convicted of anything. But because of all the terrible publicity that came about from that, the Queen essentially removed the various organizations and his military. He had been in the military, took away all of those titles. And he's, will spend the rest of his life, more or less out of the spotlight. So because he's no longer what they call a working royal, he doesn't go out and make visits and cut ribbons and do that sort of thing on behalf of the Queen. He is no longer an HRH, the Duke of York. Prince Edward is one in good standing, and he and his wife, the Countess of Wessex, are always out and about doing things for their mother on official business. Prince Andrew has two daughters. You might remember, if you've been interested in this stuff for a while, back in the 80s, I guess, Andrew married this young woman named gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Ferguson's her last name. Fergie was what they referred to her as. They got a divorce, Sarah Ferguson. But they had two daughters before they got divorced. So those two daughters are Her Royal Highness Princess Beatrice and Her Royal Highness Princess Eugenie, because they are male-line grandchildren of the sovereign. And the fact that their father is basically in disgrace or whatever doesn't impact them. And then, of course, Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, has two sons. We already know the older one, the Duke of Cambridge, who, of course, is His Royal Highness. And Prince Harry, the younger one, who I don't see anybody could have missed hearing about him the last couple of years after he married Meghan Markle, the American-Canadian actress. And they're deciding that they didn't want to be working royals anymore and move to Santa Barbara in California. Same thing happened with him. The Queen essentially took away, all of his duties and so forth, and he lost the Royal Highness designation as well. Probably in earlier generations that wouldn't have happened, but we're in different times now, and there's so much interest, particularly, with people like Prince Harry and so forth. Okay, so picture you're seeing here on the right is an annual event that takes place in June, where they have the ceremony for the Order of the Garter, which is one of these chivalric orders that still in existence. And in fact, being a Knight of the Garter is probably as high an honor as most people in the UK could aspire to. But anyway, the Queen is the head, because she's Queen, the head of the order, and they're headed into St. George's Chapel here in Windsor, for the annual ceremony. And it's a wonderful event as far as the bands and the costumes and so forth that they all wear. All right, so we'll say a little bit more about the royal family, what I'm calling the extended royal family. There's no legal definition anywhere in the UK of who is and who isn't a part of the royal family. officially, as far as the royal family is concerned, it's the people who are styled Royal Highness. And they're the ones who traditionally get bowed and curtsy to. So you remember earlier I told you, according to the rules that were set up in 1917, the royal family, or anyone who's a Royal Highness, is a child or a male line grandchild of the sovereign at the time. Now, unofficially, the extended royal family is much bigger. It includes the official one I was talking about above, plus children, grandchildren, cousins, and all who are of royal descent, but who have no royal titles. And this group certainly is by far bigger than the official one. On the right here are some pictures of some members of both the official royal family and the extended royal family. At the top here, and these may be ones that, depending on how interested you are in the subject, you've seen or heard of or not. The two people here on the left, that's the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester. The Duke is the Queen's first cousin, and he is a male line grandchild of King George V. Next to him is the Duke of Kent, who is also a male line grandchild of King George V, and his sister, Princess Alexandra. So they are all royal highnesses because, again, of their male line descent from King George V, who was Queen Elizabeth's grandfather. Below here are some of the extended members of the family who are not royal highnesses. The two that actually what we're actually seeing here is the two on the right, the man and the woman. These are the late Princess Margaret's children. You remember Queen Elizabeth had one sister, Princess Margaret, who died 20 plus years ago. And that's her son, who is, gosh, I should have written some of this down. I hadn't been back over it a while. He's the Earl, he's Anthony Armstrong Jones's son now. That's their daughter, I'll think of in a minute. And then this is the daughter's husband and their two children. Now the daughter has no title other than her styling of being a lady because her father was an earl. But beyond that, their family name is Chatto, Chatto, and she's lady, and he's Mr. And their sons have no title, plain Mr. and Miss, other than the fact, that their great aunt is Queen Elizabeth. So that's what I mean when I talk about people who are definitely members of but it's an extended family, and they don't get the Royal Highness to go along with it. Some people would say, the royal family is all of those people who every June who are invited to stand on the balcony of Buckingham Palace during the trooping of the color ceremony, or the people who get invited to the Queen's Christmas luncheon, at Buckingham Palace. So anyhow, it's up to sort of how you might want to define it there. I just remembered here now, Princess Margaret's son, he's the Earl of Snowdon. That's his title. Because, again, not because of it from Princess Margaret, but because his father was created the Earl of Snowdon when he married Princess Margaret. He's dead now, so his son inherits that title. Confusing, I'm sure. I'll stop here. Any questions or comments? Okay, then let's keep rolling here. As I mentioned earlier on, one of the reasons I put together, this lecture was that I had a number of people that I know who are, real fans of British literature and, just were totally lost in terms of the styles and titles and so forth, that they would run across in the books. So I decided rather than just making it about royalty, we would include, the aristocracy or the upper class as well. The traditional British upper class, if you're a student of British history or like British history, is made up of two large groups. Now, before I go any further, let me also interject this too. Because of its history, which is thousands of years old, Britain, the United Kingdom, has evolved as traditionally a very hierarchical society, with everybody fitting somewhere into, what today we would probably call a class. And so if you want to think of British society as being kind of like a pyramid, you would have the common people at, the bottom, the people who were farmers and laborers and so forth. And then above them, you would have, what the British would call the middle class, which would have several different layers depending upon how much wealth you had or education. And then the top of the pyramid is the traditional upper class, which is, and then at the very tip end of the pinnacle, of course, is the sovereign and the royal family. So the traditional upper class is made up of untitled, what the Brits call gentry families. And they are far and away the largest part of the upper class. Historically, if you were a gentry family, it meant that you had lived, or your family had lived in one place, oftentimes for centuries. And there are hundreds of members of the British upper class where this still fits. You owned a significant amount of land. Because you got to remember, before the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century and 19th century, Britain was like everywhere else in Europe. The economy was primarily agricultural, and the bulk of the population were farmers or people involved in agriculture. So wealth was tied to the ownership of land. And that would be true of everybody, both groups that we're going to talk about here in the upper class. Their wealth, their position and status was tied to the amount of land that they owned. And also how long, essentially, they might have owned that land. So the gentry families are those who traditionally, have been landowners for centuries. And there are many, many British gentry families today who've never had a title. They've never been granted a peerage anywhere, but they can trace their ancestors, back to about the time of William the Conqueror in 1066. Their ancestor might have come over with William as a soldier, been granted land somewhere in England, and their descendants are still, there today. So they've traditionally been the people who lived in the big house, in the neighborhood, and who were socially and on a local level, politically, very influential. Oftentimes, when you're reading about them, in literature, you'll see them referred to as, a country squire. Now, the peerage, as I've already mentioned, is the top part, of the upper class. Most of the people who become peers, their families started out, as members of the gentry. very, very few examples until very modern time of anybody, starting out, as a farm laborer and rising up to, becoming an earl or a duke or whatever. But the peers were the people who, for all kind of reasons, were rewarded by a monarch for some kind of service or support over the centuries. And they were granted one of these hereditary peerages. And that meant then that they moved, to the front of the line, socially speaking. So, and all of the members of their immediate family were also considered to be, have the same social status and so forth, even though only one person at a time actually holds the peerage. So the pictures I've given you here are just kind of examples of the one on the top, might be a house where a local gentry family might have lived for several hundred years, a really, by our standards, a very, very nice place, but nothing as large or grand as something like the one below here, which is Blickling Hall, which was, built by a member of the peerage, with much larger and greater resources. So again, takeaway point, when you're talking about British upper class, it's a mix, if you will, of the gentry families, who are the biggest part of it, and then the family with the peers. Or it's a confusing term, and I'll say this now because I'll probably use it. You might think, what's he talking about? When an individual is granted a title, when he's made an earl or a baron or whatever, he is granted a peerage and he becomes a peer. When you talk about all of the people who have titles, who are peers, you also refer to that as the peerage. Go figure. I don't have an answer for you, but that, again, is the way the system has evolved, over the centuries. Okay, questions here? Anybody? You're all in a daze now. Okay, then let's shoulder on here. So let's then look at the peerage itself, and the levels are more precisely the different ranks in the peerage, because this is where typically you're likely, if you're, watching Downton Abbey or Bridgerton or, any of these other shows, that are historic in nature, where you have people in it, who are peers, where people get totally lost as far as, well, who's that, or why is he or she, called that, and so forth. Hopefully I can maybe shed a little bit of light on it. The British peerage has 5 ranks in it, in descending order of status. At the top is a duke, which is the highest rank. The wife of a duke is a duchess. When dukes are referred to or styled, as we would say, they are styled as Your Grace. You would never refer to a duke as Lord, whatever his title is. Dukes are special, and they are the smallest, as you might imagine, group within the peerage. Last time I checked, not counting the royal family dukes, there's somewhere between 25 and 30 of them. So given that the total peerage has, say, roughly now about 1,100 members, you can see that's a pretty small percentage. Now, where it gets sticky, with how the system works, the eldest son, that is the person who the the man who is going to be in line to succeed his father when he dies, his duke, traditionally uses a secondary peerage in the family as what we would call a courtesy title. Now, whenever say a dukedom, and that's the term you use when a person is created, or when a male is created a duke, he is given a dukedom, put D-O-M on the end of it. But the way the system evolved, not only would he be made a duke, but typically also a marquis and an earl and a viscount. In other words, he would also get what are called secondary peerages at the same time. There are some British really old peerages that have been around, for centuries, where they have 8 or 10 or even more, titles that belong to the title, but they only use one, and it's always the highest one. So the eldest son of a duke, while his father is alive, gets to use one of those secondary peerages. It's for social purposes primarily. Younger sons and daughters are styled Lord, whatever their first name is, plus the family name. If it's a woman, she is Lady, first name, family name. Example would be going back to the 19th century, Lord Randolph Churchill, who was a younger son of the Duke of Marlborough. All right, after a duke in the system, you have the title of marquis. And this is the one probably we hear the least frequently, in terms of movies and books and so forth. But it's the second highest rank in the peerage. The wife of a marquis is a marchioness. Marquises can be referred to as Lord plus whatever the title is. Same rules for the eldest son and younger sons and daughters apply as for duke's children. In other words, the oldest son can use one of his father's secondary titles. The younger sons and daughters are Lord, first name, whatever the family name is. Moving on down the system, the next title and the oldest one in the peerage is an earl. And this is the only title in the British peerage system that goes back to before the Norman conquest in 1066. See, this whole peerage system was brought to England by the Normans. In other words, it was devised basically in France originally, and then after the Normans, who came from Normandy in France, after they conquered and took over England, then they brought the system with them and installed it. But an earl was a title that was used by the Anglo-Saxon nobility before the Norman conquest, and it hung on. And if you were looking at nobility in the different countries on the continent, the equivalent of an earl would be a count. And for that reason, the wife of an earl is not called an earless or an earline or whatever, but she is a countess. And again, I've never seen a reason for it other than the fact that just something like earless or earline just sounds too bizarre or whatever. But they early on, started calling an earl's wife a countess because the title is equivalent to a count on the continent. Like with marquises, earls can be referred to, as Lord, whatever the, plus title. Downton Abbey, if you've been a fan of that, and I imagine most of you, if you are, saw that the movie's coming out, I think this week or next week. But you remember in Downton Abbey, the owner of Downton Abbey is the Earl of Grantham. So you can refer to him as the Earl of Grantham, or you can refer to him as Lord Grantham. Either one, are perfectly correct. His oldest son, like with a duke and a marquis, can use a secondary peerage as a courtesy title. The younger sons, however, of an earl are styled the honorable first name, family name, but the daughters are styled lady first name, family name. And again, if you're a Downton Abbey fan, you remember the Earl of Grantham's family name is Crawley. So his daughters are like, the oldest one, but Lady Mary Crawley. Okay. Next one down is a viscount. The wife of a viscount is a viscountess. Viscounts can be referred to as Lord plus title, like Viscount Castlereagh, who was a famous British diplomat. All of the children of viscounts are styled the honorable first name, family name. No lords or ladies with them. And then the fifth and lowest title in the peerage is a baron, and it's also, after an earl, the oldest one. The oldest current title still in existence in the UK actually is a baron. The wife of a baron is a baroness. And they can be referred to, as Lord plus title, or Baron, whatever their family name is. Like with the Viscount, all of their children are styled the honorable first name, family name. And this is the kind of stuff that you run into, when you're, again, in literature and movies and stuff. When people are called, lady or Lord so-and-so, or the honorable, what have you. But this is how it all essentially works and evolved over the century. I mean, this whole system, there's nothing logical about it. It just evolved because of all kind of the history of what was happening in the UK at the time. And this is how it's all come to be today. And some people would say, it's an anachronism that needs to be probably totally done away with, but I doubt it's going to happen anytime soon. Questions?
A question about now UK. Now so Scottish history, if you were reading in various stories or reading Scottish history, genealogy and so forth, these titles are pretty similar. I mean, right? I mean, this was so there's not much. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Bill. No, go ahead and finish.
No. That I just was wondering. I mean, I may show my ignorance about the.
Right. No, that's an excellent observation, and the answer to it is the systems are almost identical. In other words, the Scots eventually, while Scotland, was still because remember, Scotland was an independent
Right.
state until 1603, when James I of Scotland also became James VI of Scotland became James I of England. That's when the two countries were first united. But anyway, the Scots basically adopted, this same system. That was, with one exception, in the Scottish peerage, they don't use the title baron, but the person who has the equivalent title is called a Lord of Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, it all works the same.
Well, reason I asked that is so that Bert and others that know me real well will know my peerage, my Scottish peerage, so that my Earl history.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, I was going to say, if you're an Earl, I mean, that's pretty hot stuff. So,
no,
I've known him a long time and never knew that.
No. I just digging in my genealogy and some of those Earls that have some part of my history.
Well,
I don't think I have any peerage.
we can refer to you as your lordship then, if you're an Earl. Good dog. Anybody else have it? You know, like I said, it gets very complicated. That's why told you earlier, I've put all this together in a cheat sheet that you're gonna get. So if it's of enough interest to it, hold on to that, and you know, you can go back and refer to it if you ever have, you know, any interest in. Because like I said, it's pretty hardcore, what I call hardcore information.
I've
Anybody
known
else?
Dr. Bill for a long time, but I refuse to call him his lordship.
Okay, all right. Well, I was going to say I don't have a dog in that fight, so I'll stay out of it.
Not a question, but just a comment.
Okay.
I'm so much more grateful for the American Revolution.
Well, you know, you're probably not the only person who would say that. So
That just goes so against my grain.
I have a question. In books and movies, we hear the term count used a lot. Is that simply a peerage title in European countries like Count Dracula and never used in British peerage? Where it's a countess, but we don't say.
Correct. That's what I was referring to when I was talking about the title of an earl. An earl is the equivalent of a count on the continent. In other words, it's the same thing. It was just because that title, you know, was around and had been very important, you know, in the history of Anglo-Saxon England, they kept it. And that's why I said the wife of an earl is a countess. But whenever if you're seeing, you know, reading about somebody in France or Italy, you know, anywhere who's a count, just think of that, you know, that's an equivalent title to a British earl. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, let's move along here, see how far we get. All right. Now, to muddy the waters even further, as I said, the Brits haven't, you know, had this class system for 1,000 years for nothing. And this is what I'm going to talk to you about now is also one that comes up very, very often, you know, in books, movies, and whatever. In addition to the hereditary titles of peerage, there are two additional titles, or as the technically you'd say British, are honors, that are awarded in the UK that you often run into in different places. First one is a baronet. Now, a baronetcy, which is the term for, you know, if somebody gets one, is a hereditary title that is not a peerage. It's a relatively new title compared to the ones in the peerage. It first was used, I think, around the 17th century, in the 1600s, after James VI of Scotland became James I of England. And he was always short of money. He was a big spender. So came up with the idea of, well, if people want to make financial contributions to their monarch, then potentially, you know, we can repay them for rendering that service by giving them a hereditary title, but it's not going to be a peerage. Now, I didn't mention earlier, but I should, until about 30 years ago, anybody who had a peerage, who was a duke, marquis, earl, viscount, or baron, automatically had a seat in the House of Lords. And the House of Lords, you know, is the upper house of the British Parliament. So, you know, there were a lot of things power-wise that went along with having a peerage, and having a seat in the House of Lords is one of them. But if you were people who were granted the title of baronet, even though they could pass it along, to their the next generation, they were not eligible to sit in the House of Lords. And of course, a baronetcy didn't have the social cachet, and status and so forth that a peerage did. But over the centuries, a lot of them, have been granted. Now, if you are a baronet, you are styled Sir, first name, family name, and your wife is lady, family name. Examples: Sir John Smith and Lady Smith. If you have children, they don't get any style in front of their name. They're just plain old Mr. or Miss. Baronets also typically, when you see their names in print, will have BT after them, as in Sir John Smith, baronet. And as I said, hundreds of these baronetcies have been granted over the centuries, and there's still a lot of them, still around today that go back centuries. They've families have been able to keep them going by, producing, having a son who's there to inherit the title and then pass it on to the next generation. But that's what you have to do. Far and away, the largest number of honors that certainly are given today, in fact, it's 95% of them, would be when people are created a knight or a dame. Now, knighthoods are non-hereditary titles. That is, they're given just to the person receiving it, and when that person dies, that's the end of it. They're awarded by the monarch, and you can see in the picture here, the queen, she's got her ceremonial sword there, and she's smacking him on the shoulder, proclaiming him whatever knighthood order he's a part of. And they're used today to recognize many different types of service. Today, probably as many women receive the honor as men, which is a good thing. And if it's a woman receiving a knighthood, she is not referred to as a knight, but she is a dame. And if you are a knight or a dame, you're a member of what are called orders. And this goes back, again, centuries and centuries, way back into the Middle Ages. In terms of British literature and mythical history, probably the earliest order were the Knights of the Round Table, if you remember them, with King Arthur. All the knights who lived with them were members of that order. Well, since that time, there have been many, many of these orders created, typically for different groups and for different reasons, and they vary tremendously in status, with the top of the heap this day being the one I'd already mentioned, the Knight or the Order of the Garter, which was created in the 14th century. And there can only be 24 members of it at any one time. I showed you the picture, of the ceremony when they're, were marching down the hill for their annual meeting. That's the most prestigious one. And then, it devolves from there. There are really large ones, huge ones that have thousands of members, like you may have heard of the Order of the British Empire. That you'll see reference somebody getting an OBE. And that can be people, who do significant community work. They can be typically are just totally ordinary people who, do good things, and to get rewarded for it, they are given a knighthood, and, get to do neat things like come to London and have the Queen or some member of the royal family induct them into it. So all knighthoods are not created equally, but nonetheless, they are something that instill a country that is still very class, oriented. It's still a big deal regardless, because if you're made a knight or a dame, then for the rest of your life, you get to be called, Sir, first name, family name, or Dame, first name, family name. And if you're a knight, your wife also gets to be called Lady, family name, like this up here, Sir John Smith and Lady Smith. Your children don't get anything from it, like within the peerage. They're still just Mr., Miss, whatever. So as I said, every year, several thousand knighthoods are created, to reward people, for doing good things in the UK. Some of them are also rewarded, are given for political reasons and popular reasons, like, Paul McCartney of the Beatles is Sir Paul McCartney, and, celebrities do get them as well, some of them. But for the most part, Britain is not nearly as hierarchical and class, I won't use the term obsessed, class ridden as it probably once was. But still, my observation is the class system over there is, still going strong. So getting an honor like being made a knight or a dame, still counts for a lot. Questions, comments? Well, as I said, this, when you're watching British whodunits on TV or whatever, and you hear somebody named, Sir so-and-so or Lady so-and-so or what, most likely you're looking at, somebody who is who's a knight.
How many knights are there in Great Britain today?
I have no idea. Thousands. Literally. Again, because nowadays they're given out as service awards for all kinds of things, not just service to the monarch. So again, they publish about twice a year. They'll be published, and it's hundreds and hundreds of people every time. So I'm sure there are thousands of knights and dames, but there are only about 1,000 peers. And, so big difference from a class, status point of view. Anybody else? All right, so I've tried to kind of pull it all together here a little bit and go over some of the things that we just talked about. Again, to sort of sum up, particularly if you're reading or watching TV or movies, about Britain, if somebody's called Lord so-and-so, and you want to try to understand, well, who exactly, is he in the context of his family? If he is called Lord, whatever a title is, like, Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey, you're looking at a peer. If he's called Lord with a first name and a last name, that you're looking at somebody who is a younger son of a duke or a marquis. And if any of you have ever read any of she's not as popular now as she was a decade or two ago, the British mystery Dorothy Sayers. She had this title, or this character in many of her novels, who was called Lord Peter Wimsey. There were some Masterpiece Theater things had him in it too. He has that styling because he was a younger son, of a duke. The one that's the trickiest, as I pointed out, is the one where somebody is where they start off, they're called Lady. If it's lady plus a title, you're looking at someone who's married to a peer or who could potentially have a peerage in her own right. There are a few of those. If you're here and she's called Lady Jones, Lady Smith, or whatever, you're looking at somebody who's the wife of a knight, or a baronet. There are a few basic things about it that once you kind of understand the system, you can, pick up on it. Again, going back to Downton Abbey, it's Lord Grantham, but his daughters, is Lady Mary Crawley. Lady, first name, family name. Peers other than dukes can be referred to in two ways, as I pointed out. They can be referred to by their full title, again, the Earl of Grantham, or the short version, Lord Grantham, or as I said here, the Earl of Winchelsea or Lord Winchelsea. Same is true for their wives. The styling that people use depends on typically the social situation. And as I've said, there are a few really, really old peerages where actually women were allowed to inherit them if there were no sons left. And the women who, or in this case, they're called a peeress in their own right, which means that, they have the title, and in earlier times would have been allowed to, sit in the House of Lords. And the same rules apply to them, as would the males. The difference would be if it is a peeress in her own right and her husband doesn't have a title of his own, he's plain old Mister. Men don't inherit titles from women with the very, very few exceptions. So again, when you get down to this level, you're really digging into the nitty gritty, of how the system works. Let's see, what have I got in the picture here? I love this quote from Oscar Wilde. And then what we see here on the bottom is a couple of peers who are all duded up, dressed up. They're probably getting ready to participate in state opening of Parliament. Every year, normally, you have when the British Parliament convenes, for its session that year, you have this wonderful ceremonial where the monarch normally comes to the House of Parliament and delivers what's called the speech from the throne. And it's toned down now a lot from the way it once was, in terms of the number of people who participated in the royal family and whatever, but it's still a really big deal. And they wear a lot of the traditional garb. And again, that's what you see there is this, these are two peers who are probably getting ready to, go in and take their seats, in the House of Lords to listen to the speech. And incidentally, I saw this morning, I think the state opening of Parliament was today, since they're 8 hours ahead. The Queen was not able to attend, unfortunately, because of these mobility issues she's having. And Prince Charles, the Prince of Wales, delivered the speech for her. I want to look at it later. All right, since we've got a little time, I thought you might be interested in this. What we're looking at here is essentially the marriage license for Queen Elizabeth when she married Prince Philip back in 1947. One of the things that when you get married in a religious ceremony in the UK, you have typically at some point in the ceremony, the bride and the groom and the people who are the designated witnesses go and they literally stop the ceremony, and typically they go and sign a register, making it all official that, the people, plus all the people who are the official witnesses, are putting down in writing that, yeah, this is what happened, and, we approve and so forth. But this one for the Queen is a really good one of showing, and we've got a little time here, so I'll go over it briefly with you. I think you might find it interesting. So, this is, a page that, that was filled in that, telling where it took place, Westminster Abbey, and the date and the county, and and then who the bride and groom were. Philip Mountbatten, which was his official name by that point. The Queen here, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor. And she was designated, I love this, as a spinster. And then showing their titles, and showing then, who their parents and so forth were. And then you come down to the, the main part of it for the signatures. You see the bride and groom sign up here at the top. And you remember I was telling you that royalty, those that, get to put Royal Highness in front of their name do not use a surname. So you see they signed it Philip and Elizabeth. Then you go below them here, and George R., that's Queen Elizabeth's father, who at that time was the king, King George VI, and her mother, who's also named, Elizabeth, the Queen Mom. And then, so they signed it, and you see they put an R after their name. That's kind of one part of the system that stands for either, in his case, Rex, the Latin word for king, or in her case, Regina for queen. When you're the monarch and the consort of the monarch, you traditionally, do that. Down below here is Mary. That was the King George VI's mother, Queen Mary, who was the wife of King George V. She's was the Queen's grandmother. And then you see some of the other signatures here, and you notice this one, Alice. That was Prince Philip's mother, who was Princess Al. She chose to sign her name as Alice Princess Andrew of Greece, because that was her husband's name. That's not a typical signature. The Queen's sister, you see Princess Margaret. I don't know why she wrote it so small. She, she inserted her name there. Then here, Alice and Henry. That's the Queen's aunt and uncle, who were the sons, who were the brother and his wife of George V. They weren't royal highnesses, so you see they just signed their first name. And then the same here, Marina, who was the widow of the Duke of Kent. That's the way she signed her. So royalty, again, if you're entitled to have an HRH in front of your name, you only sign your first name. Now, some of these others are relatives who are not royal highnesses, who would have been peers. And this is a good one over here. A lot of you, I imagine you remember Lord Mountbatten, who was a distant relative, who was the World War II hero and the last viceroy of India, and who was murdered back in '79 when the IRA blew up the boat, that he and his family were on. Peers normally sign their name with the name of the peerage. So his peerage was he was the Earl Mountbatten of Burma, because he commanded the British forces in Southeast Asia during World War II. So when he was made an earl, his peerage was the Earl Mountbatten of Burma. So that's the way he signed his name. Didn't sign his first name, which was Louis. And above him here is his wife. And you see, she signs it Edwina Mountbatten of Burma. And that's the system. The peeress, the wife of the peer, normally signs first name, peerage name, as opposed to, again, a normal, last name. So that's probably about enough. Your heads are probably spinning by this point. So, we've probably given you enough detail here. So anybody have any questions, comments about anything we talked about today? Maybe you've decided now, what a useless amount of information here, but I warned you. Anybody?
So I'm sorry. The question, I wonder, this whole decision that was announced that Queen Elizabeth had said that Camilla would be designated queen. Is there, in your interest and study of this, that designation in terms of royalty, it's not an automatic. It has to be or is it? Is that a given? Or I mean, there's just the fact that she made that announcement was interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting. I'm glad you were picked up on that. You remember Prince Charles originally was married to Diana, who was not royalty by birth, but was a member of a very, very high aristocracy family. And they got a very contentious divorce. And it was she was very popular and Charles was not very popular, particularly after it came out that he and Camilla had been an item for a long time and had continued to be during his marriage. So Charles and Camilla were kind of in the proverbial doghouse, we might say, at the time. So when he married, decided that he couldn't live without Camilla and was going to marry her as his second wife, just because of probably because the poll said that this is not a popular thing to do now, and we already have a Princess of Wales, who the public adored, whether rightfully so or not, that's a different question. But anyhow, part of the, and it was a PR thing. There was nothing legal about it. They said that going forward, that Camilla would not use the title Princess of Wales, which she was completely entitled to, as the wife of the prince. She would use one of his other titles. Remember, I told you he's also the Duke of Cornwall. So that's what she has used, ever since the two of them got married. I think what the Queen was doing there was she's decided I don't know how long they've been married now, 15, going on 20 years. Well, that, Camilla's done a great job, and she has the current Queen's, full support and endorsement. And I think she made that announcement to maybe whenever she's gone and Charles, will become the new king, that might help head off if there's any, bad press or publicity about. Camilla said, she would never use the title queen. Well, if she's the wife of the king, she is the queen. That's what
I. Yeah.
So I think it was just again Queen trying to do a good turn, so to speak, for her son and daughter-in-law, and help kind of ease the way that, and given the Queen's state of health now, it might be sooner than we think. Time will tell, but that's what that was about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Anybody else?
I wanted to mention that it was very extraordinary recently that Charlotte, William's daughter, can now become queen.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh, you mean as far as the line of succession?
Yes, the line of
Yeah,
succession
right.
has
Yeah,
changed.
Yeah, exactly. Until I don't know when they changed. I forgot now, and maybe it's been in the last 15 years or so. They changed the what's called the rules or order of succession. Before it had been, and what it's always been, up until this point, of a system of male preferment. So in this case, with Queen Elizabeth, she had the 3 sons, and 1 daughter. Well, Princess Anne was the second child, but in the order of who could, succeed if things happened to ones above them. Princess Anne, went to the bottom. But they decided, I think, again, it was public opinion and so forth, that they needed to get with the times. And so changed the rule now that the children, of the monarch, the order of succession is purely birth order.
Right.
Now, because Prince William, Prince Charles's sons, he has the 3 children now. His oldest child was a son, Prince George. So, that, but with the new rules, had the firstborn, been his daughter, her name's Princess Charlotte, she would have been then first in line.
Right.
So again, I think it was a overdue change in terms of, particularly for the future, and assuming that there'll be a monarchy in the future, that, that women will, have the same rights in terms of birth order as the male children.
Do you
Good.
think,
Some of y'all are more interested in this than I might have thought initially. Good for you.
do you
Other-
think that, I have a question. Do you
Sure.
think that played into Harry's decision to step down because he kept going further down the line of, importance as a royal? I'm still shocked and mystified and whatever you want to call it, that he just was convinced. I feel like he was coerced by his wife to do this. And I'm still just like, how do you walk away from so much history
Yeah.
and family? And I'm still, whatever. I'm still shocked by it.
Yeah, well, you and lots of other folks.
Yeah. Or
I-
it could be the fact that in just like what you just said, Michael, about the, will the monarchy exist and in the future? But I think the healthy tension there is between constitutional monarchy and modern times and millennials and people who are, and a generation who are saying, hey, what's this all about? And I tend to look at them as is in that vein versus what might have happened. I think their struggle with security and what their life is about and so forth. But it's interesting too. There's an interesting video on YouTube or around showing the line of succession, because you get bumped pretty easily. It's by birth order, like you
Yeah.
say. It's not
purely.
Yeah.
Well,
even to the point that the children of William have bumped Harry and
Oh,
all.
yeah.
Correct. I don't know the reason, my speculation about the situation with Harry is that Meghan, is the Dutch, they're the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. She couldn't adapt. it was just too hard because of her being, you know, an American Canadian and being an independent woman for a long time, you know, being an actress and whatever, that it's difficult, I think, you know, being a member, a working member, you know, of the royal family, in terms of particularly having to deal with, you know, all the rules and regs and precedents and this sort of thing. And I think, you know, they decided, you know, we just don't. And I think it was probably more Meghan than Harry, because I mean, Harry grew up with it. He knows, you know, how everything works, but they decided that, you know, they didn't want to be, they weren't saying they weren't part of the family, because they're not.
Right.
You know, they're coming for the Jubilee, you know, ceremonies in June, supposedly. But they did not want to be working royals anymore. So as a result of that,
I think maybe
and the thing moving to California, now that was pretty, that was a pretty radical step, you know, for a British royal. So,
Freddie, you have a question?
I think maybe he had more of his mother's spirit too.
well, could
He
be.
wanted her boys to have a more normal life, and I think maybe that just stuck with him.
He obviously did not feel the sense of duty that other royals have. So he's had the option. He's got plenty of money, and you know, that he inherited, what have you. So it'll be interesting to see in the future, going forward in the future, what happens with them.
I also read that at the Jubilee, when they do the balcony photo shoot or whatever appearance, that only the working royals will be on the balcony. So
That's correct.
Andrew won't be there, nor will Harry and Meghan.
Right. Nor will some of the other, even some of the members, you know, who are styled Royal Highness, like Prince Andrew's daughters, and one of the Kent cousins. Essentially, what they've said is the only people who will be on the balcony this, you know, in June will be the ones who carry out official duties, you know, for the Queen, you know, for the government. So it's going to be a much smaller group than, you know, what we're seeing here.
Well, I think that's the right choice, truthfully.
So
One last thing from me. Every once in a while, something pops up to make me realize how old I am. I remember seeing the coronation in black and white TV on a small set.
yeah, I vaguely remember it too. I can probably match you year for year. So yeah, I can. You know, I can too. I would. So I mentioned it earlier because I know we're running out of time here. If you have a chance today and you enjoy, you know, looking at the ceremonial, and it should be pretty easy to find today, you know, watch the state opening of Parliament that, you know, that just took place in the last 24 hours. And because it's always an interesting ceremony. Yeah, let's just hope that the Queen will be able to participate in the Jubilee ceremonial, you know, in June, because
In the very old days, the people that became physicians in England were called doctor as a title. And we do that same thing in the United States. And they looked very much down on the surgeons, who were just more glorified barbers, didn't really know much. Well, finally, when they decided the surgeons kind of knew enough to be, they had to be trained as a doctor. So, well, you can call yourself doctor. And they said, no, we'll just keep calling ourselves Mr. So Mr. is actually a title in your training higher than doctor. When I went over to England to do my thoracic surgery, they called me Dr. Walker for a little while. And then after I kind of earned my ropes, then I gained the title of Mr. Walker. So it was quite a thing to be called Mr. instead of Doctor. Better, higher level.
Well, you're absolutely right there. Originally, Mr. was a styling, you know, of respect that, say, somebody, you know, who was a farm laborer or what would have just been Joe Jones, and he wouldn't have had any kind of, you know, title, style, or whatever put in front of his name, where being called Mr. or Master, was what it originally was. That indicated you were a person of some consequence. Yeah, it's all part, again, as I said, of, having this hierarchical, class system. And Britain's not the only one. I mean, most other older countries in Europe, have something similar, or did, and it's hung on longer in Britain probably than it has in, say, places like France or Germany or what have you. But in any case, I hope you learned a few things that you might find interesting or stand you in good stead when you're doing some reading or watching. And I very much enjoyed talking to your group, and I appreciate your having me.
Thank you. Thank you to us. Dr. Wilson summed it up quite well. He said, wonderful presentation. This is truly what our Marshall Lifelong Learning is about. Learning of matters we may not have been exposed to. So he says truly lifelong learning. So this has been a different topic for us, and you've covered it beautifully. And I will send the cheat sheet out to the group.
Yeah, be sure and do that.
All right. Well, thank you for your time and your expertise. Your knowledge is amazing, and you answered some questions for a lot of us. I love Downton Abbey. I'm watching it for maybe the 5th or 6th or 7th time. I don't know. And
Go to the movie together.
Yes, we should do a group thing for the movie. I had thought about that, and now I understand why Lady Mary was so upset when Lady Edith was going to be a Marchioness, which is going to be above
because exactly, she would outrank her, if
yes.
In a social situation.
Yes. Yeah.
So
that kind of brought that together for me. I kind of had figured it out, but not to the point that you explained it. So thank you. My husband especially has been a guest today. He's been very quiet, but he loves British history. His undergraduate degree is in history. He has a law degree, but so he was real excited to sit in with us today. He was my invited guest today.
Well, as I said, the cheat sheet that I sent you, has got the core of what we talked about today. So if you find it interesting enough, hang on to it. You can even refer to it potentially.
I have it right here, and I'm going to send it out just as soon as we conclude our discussion. But again, thank you. Dr. Walker also has chimed in. He really enjoyed today. And the fact that we kept all of our audience today, sometimes people have things they have to go and do. And so I'm real pleased that you could come on, and through the beauty of Zoom, we would not have been able to have you had we not had these Zoom opportunities. So we are making the best we can of Zoom and reaching out to places and people who we normally wouldn't be able to talk to. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You all have a good day and stay dry from what you were talking about.
We're in the clear now. Diane, do you have something to say?
I just wanted to thank him for the really great presentation, and I'm delighted that we don't have a test on this.
Me too, because I would have to grade it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, goodbye now.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.